Hi, welcome to Chapter 3. How does gender affect the monster? Now, your first response might be kind of, huh? What does gender have to do with anything as it relates to monsters? Do monsters have gender? I mean, is Godzilla a boy or a girl? Who knows? Well, gender does have an effect. There are monsters that are specifically connected to gender. And while some of those are obviously male, like the creature from Frankenstein, some are female. Other aspects of this question, though, dig a little deeper into questions, for example, of audience. How gender is presented may affect us as recipients, viewers, readers of the stories. Our authors in this chapter are examining both kinds of issues. Gender as it may relate to the specific identity of a monster. Gender, though, as we experience the stories and interpret the monster or monsters, may well be influenced by gender. The first story is called The Evolving Legend of La Llorona. This is a character who comes to us from Mexico. La Llorona has deep roots, however, that predate the modern-day Mexico, back to the time of the Aztecs. La Llorona basically is a woman who has been abandoned by her husband/lover, right? Sometimes it's a lover, sometimes it's a full-on husband. She has been abandoned for a higher caste woman, a higher status woman. And she is left with her children. So she kills her children. She kills her own children. As a consequence, whether through curse, grief, punishment, what have you, La Llorona wanders and wanders, crying out, mis hijos, my children, looking for children. And bad little boys and girls who don't listen to their parents and do what they're told may be snatched away by La Llorona. As I said, La Llorona has ancient roots. And La Llorona also has cousins. That is, other archetypal female characters like this. Think, for instance, obviously, of Medea from Greek mythology. Killed her own children. And then, in fact, doubled down on that by serving their flesh to her husband. Thanks, Mom. Wow. It's one of the ultimate taboos. It goes against a lot of cultures, a lot of ingrained ideas of motherhood. So La Llorona violates this in the killing of her own kids. She's a monster. Something to think about. That's the Amy Fuller article. Next up is a passage from the Odyssey by Homer. Many of you are probably aware, Homer, ancient Greek, not cartoon character, ancient Greek epic poet, wrote the Iliad, which is a story of the Trojan War. The Odyssey, the sequel, takes up with a character called Ulysses, or as he's known in the Greek, Odysseus. Now, Odysseus has run afoul of the god Poseidon. Now, when your main mode of transportation home is to sail across the ocean, or the sea, I should say, making Poseidon the god of the waters, right, the god of the sea, making him mad is a very bad move. And as a consequence, Odysseus wanders. Odysseus and his crew wander. They cannot get back to Ithaca. At one point in the journey, Odysseus is told that he must sail past the island of the Sirens. Now, the Sirens are an interesting monster because their depiction has basically changed over time. In the ancient Greek time of Homer, the Sirens would have been perceived as bird creatures with the heads of women. In later times, the bird thing not being all that appealing, the Sirens sort of evolved into more of what we might think of as traditional mermaids. But if you look at older depictions of this story, the Sirens have the body of birds, the head of women. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, the Sirens sing, and their song is so attractive, so powerful that men, the sailors, will leap out of their ships into the waters to them and basically drown. So Odysseus has a difficult task. He must hear their song, and yet at the same token, he must not die. You'll have to read the passage to see how he solves this particular dilemma. Oh, and the song, by the way, is not just any old song. It is a song of all knowledge. The knowledge of all things. Does that sound familiar? It should. Picking up on the story of the mermaid is Reclaiming the Mermaid by Sophia Kingshill. And she looks at how the mermaid has been presented and, how shall I say it, modernized. How the mermaid can be a symbol of female empowerment, women's rights. Now, again, you might say to yourself off the top of your head, I don't see it. It's a half woman, half fish. How's that empowering? Well, you'll have to read Kingshill to see. But it's basically an appropriation, if you will, of what had been a very negative presentation, right? The mermaid is the dangerous woman, the sexy but false woman. You see her from the waist up, you're like, ooh la la. Waist down, it's a freaking fish. The mermaid was used by the medieval church as a way to talk about sins like lust and how bad they were. And of course, this always falls on the heads of women. You know, it's all our fault, at least according to the ancient church or the medieval church. And so it's an interesting move to latch onto that symbol and change its meaning. To say, no, it's not bad, it's good. And here's why it's good. Here's how it's good. And it's, well, I don't want to give away too much, but it's interesting as a powerful symbol for today's women's rights. And don't forget, by the way, the mermaid is a worldwide monster. It's just one of those creatures, like the vampire and like the werewolf, that actually appear all over the world. The Battle of Lapis and Centaurs. Now, if you're not familiar, the centaur is a half horse, half man. And the centaur has often been connected to the idea of our animalistic nature. The centaurs in this story from Ovid are invited to a human wedding. And at this wedding, which happens at a lot of weddings, even now today, they get a little drunk. Because centaurs are not used to wine. Okay, wine is a human creation, and therefore they're not really up for it. They don't know how to control their liquor. They grab the women, the human women. They grab the bride, and they're going to run off with the women. And the Greek men go to arms. But here's the thing about this passage. There's a particular character named Canis. And Canis has a unique, or used to be unique anyway, identity. He was born a woman, and her name was Canis. I-S ending was a feminine ending in Greek. I-S. But she was raped by the god Poseidon, that guy again. And after the rape, Poseidon gave her a quote-unquote parting gift. One wish, not three, one. And she wished to be made into a man so she could never be raped again. And not only is Canis a man, he is impenetrable. Knives, swords, arrows, nothing gets through his skin. His skin is like armor, even better than armor. Nothing can defeat him. Again, I don't want to give away the story, but the centaurs have to find a way to kill Canis. They come up with an idea, but you see how it goes. Karen Hollinger writes an article called "The Monster is Woman, 2 Generations of Cat People." Cat People is a movie. There's a movie made in the 40s and then later in the 80s. It's an examination of, again, the repression of women's sexuality. To put it simply, the main character is named Irina, and when she is sexually turned on, she turns into a panther and kills whoever the guy is. I don't want to give away the story. Let's just put it this way. The two versions are substantially different because of the different morals and situation of women in the 1940s and then the 1980s. To put it bluntly, in the 80s, you got to get it fully on before she turns into a panther. But there's more to this story, and I'll let you find out. It's a good story, though. Carol Clover is the writer who came up with the term "the final girl." The idea is the horror movies always have a final girl who survives the serial killer monster. Think Halloween, Jamie Lee Curtis, her character getting away. Clover talks about this, the final girl, and what makes the final girl different than all the other women who are killed and the men who are killed by the serial killer. You've probably heard the term because it's become such a part of pop culture now. The notion of the final girl. You know, she's the one who doesn't have sex. She's the one who is more boyish, right? Her character often has a sexually ambiguous name, right? One that could be male or female. But Clover is the one who came up with this idea, this observation. Lastly, Bodies That Splatter, Queers in Chainsaws by Judith Halberstam, who, by the way, is now Jack Halberstam. I do know that, okay? But at the time this was written, Judith was the author's name. That's why I didn't change it. Halberstam wants to go away from the binary breakdown of male and female and argue that the monster creates new categories of gender. And I think this fits very nicely into today's broader explorations of gender, not just male and female, straight or gay, bi, pansexual. The monster as a new gender altogether. That's what you get from Halberstam. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. I hope you enjoy reading it. Goodbye.